Hey guys, so I'm gonna title this video something like Two Collective Consciousnesses in One Realm Living Side by Side. So, with this ascension journey that some of us are on right now, and when I say ascension, I use that word because I don't really know what other word to use, and I feel like if I called it like a rapture process, that would create even more upset and debate with some people about my choice of words. Basically, I'm talking about trying to describe the undescribable. It's a feeling of love and ecstasy, but it's also a literal physical sensation in the body that expands out. And I know this sounds crazy, but it's like I feel like there's less gravity around my body when it comes. I know that sounds weird, but all I know is it comes from God, and it's a feeling that I've never been able to get from any human being as long as I've been alive. So I try to come up with different words to describe it, like ascension and Christ consciousness. Sometimes I call it a love wave, but I just ask that people don't get distracted by my inability to come up with a label for it that everyone agrees on. And you'll know the lower frequency individuals in the room because they'll want to distract away from the topic by getting into a debate on semantics because they don't like the word I used. But anyways, all I'm talking about is growing closer and closer to Christ, connecting to Christ consciousness in a way that feels so tangible and amazing. It's indescribable. It literally changes your state of consciousness. And I've talked to other people going through the same process, and none of us can ever tell when that state begins and when it ends because our concept of measuring it doesn't, we can't ever seem to judge its timing accurately for when it starts and ends, which I know doesn't make sense because if you're experiencing something, you should be able to say it started and ended at a specific time, but I don't ever know. It seems to change our ability to measure time. And I'll just speak for me, but my memories get affected too when I find myself in a wave of Christ consciousness. Like, I forget what lower frequency emotions even feel like. I literally can't remember until I come out of that higher state. It's really hard to describe. The only thing I know for sure is that the Christ consciousness love wave, or whatever you want to call it, comes from God, and it's an experience that surpasses any human feeling or emotion that I've ever had before. When it comes, I'd rather just sit here than go out and do something that the average person would do to feel pleasure or happiness. There's no vacation I could take or place that I could go that could even come close to that sense of bliss and fulfillment. I mean, why would I pursue a lesser emotion? That desire to search for something to make me happy goes away. And I want to, just for a second, I want to apologize to someone who I feel like I've been neglecting. If you're listening, you know who you are. I won't say your name. I am not ignoring you on purpose since you left. It's just that this wave has been a really strong one, and it's been taking all my focus, and it's hard to find enough hours in the day after working to call and text like I used to. But just know that I still care about you. But I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, guys, but um so those of us who have been going through this process for a few years now, um we've kind of learned over the years that it's like a wave that comes and goes. And when the wave reaches its peak, you feel such a sense of bliss and union with God that it's hard to imagine that anything could ever stand in the way of you feeling so wonderful when it's going on, or that you could forget such a sense of completeness when you're in it. But inevitably, as the wave recedes, it starts to become harder and harder to pin it down. And I think a big part of that is because it's more than just a feeling, it's an altered state of consciousness. To give you an idea of what I mean, it's kind of like when you're dreaming and your body feels lighter and you feel that deep sense of peace. But when you wake up, very quickly that feeling fades away, and it's almost impossible to remember or pin down exactly what that felt like until you go back to dreaming again. It brings an emotion with it, but it's so much more. And I've been thinking a lot about this wave of Christ consciousness that comes and goes, and why the amnesia always comes back after the wave goes away. I think a big reason why we forget that higher state of being is because the collective consciousness of this realm is dominated by a lower state of consciousness. So there's actually two collective consciousnesses here. It took me a while to realize that, but there is our higher collective consciousness, which is made up of higher frequency souls, and alongside us, and there's not very many of us, by the way, but alongside us is the lower collective consciousness. And in the lower state of collective consciousness that is this earth, it has so many lower frequency emotions like anxiety and despair. It's sticky. Not because the lower state of consciousness is more powerful than a higher state of consciousness. It's just that in this specific realm, there's just more low frequency souls than high frequency souls. I think if we can overcome our materialism paradigm and see that what we call the world is actually the collective consciousness, then it's so much easier to see how powerful the collective consciousness is. And I know what I'm saying goes against the constant conditioning we've all gone through since we were kids, but I truly believe that reality is composed of a combination of collective consciousness and individual consciousness. There is no external world somewhere out there that exists independent from consciousness, whether we're talking collective consciousness or individual consciousness. What we've labeled as the laws of nature are actually laws of consciousness. And don't just take my word for it. Really, for yourself, investigate how real matter is versus how real your consciousness or awareness is. If you really look into this, you can see through your own experience that what we call matter is really a manifestation created by the five senses. And the five senses aren't something that's separate from consciousness. Apples don't taste sweet. They only taste sweet because There's someone who's conscious of the taste. Like, I don't know. I'll make a video on it. There aren't things. Consciousness is not a thing. You're not an object. There are no objects. Objects don't have existence. Existence has objects. Humans have invented the idea that not only are there objects, but these objects exist outside of consciousness. But even mainstream science is disproving this right now as we speak. Now, I don't have time to go deep into the double slit experiment or non-duality teachings, but yeah, I think I'll in the future I'll probably make some videos that talk about investigating the validity of materialism. It's hard to talk in a way that sounds like matter isn't real because the way our language is set up. To be honest, I really don't think spoken language was the original way that souls used to communicate to each other. The way language is today, it's almost like a form of bondage because you can't use it without dividing everything into a subject and an object. I mean, of course, God can use archetypes to communicate with us, but I'm starting to think that art and music are actually cleaner forms of communication. But that's just me. And I go deeper into the whole language thing on my OBE video. But when I use the word amnesia, I don't mean like I don't remember things like where I parked my car. I mean, I forget stuff like that too. But what I mean is a state of amnesia in terms of not being able to remember a higher state of consciousness when that Christ consciousness bliss was once so tangible and so real. But yeah, the reason and when I say we, I'm talking about those of us who are going through this ascension process, the reason we seem to periodically forget about that higher state of consciousness is because as long as we're a part of this realm, we can sometimes get pulled down into the collective consciousness of this earth, like the lower one. When we're able to fuse ourselves with the peak of the Christ consciousness wave, the amnesia, it goes away for a little while. It becomes very clear again that there's another collective consciousness that also resides in this realm, but in a higher plane or state of being. This higher collective consciousness is actually made up of the consciousness of people like you and me, but it's different from the dominant lower collective consciousness because it's fused with the love and peace of Christ consciousness. It's such a loving, comforting feeling when you can merge with it because it's impossible to feel lonely in that place. Most of us will never ever be able to see each other in person, but there's still well, not in this realm anyway, maybe in the next, on the other side or when we pass or whenever we'll all meet up and like, I don't know, have a picnic or something. I don't know. But most of us will never be able to see each other in person, but there's still a closeness with others who are also in that state of Christ consciousness that can literally be felt when you're there. That's one reason I know that some people are already on New Earth. Now, at this time, a small number of people in the Western world seem to be popping in and out of New Earth. So we'll make it to New Earth for a little while, then fall back into a state of amnesia as we merge back into the collective consciousness of the lower frequency Earth. And this has been happening to us over and over again throughout the years as the wave of Christ consciousness comes in and out of our conscious awareness. But I'm making this video right now because I just want to say, if you're in that state of amnesia right now, don't feel like it'll never come back. It always does. You know it does. It'll eventually come back, and then there'll be peace again, and it'll be like you never left. But when we fall away, the amnesia or forgetting what the higher state of consciousness feels like, it seems so real. But just be really conscious of what you're exposing your awareness to, and really be aware of the kinds of thoughts that you have, because lower frequency negative thoughts can really act as a kind of magnet. It's a huge magnet that pulls you into the lower collective consciousness. That's where most people live right now, but we don't have to stay there permanently anymore. And try not to think of New Earth as a physical place that's somewhere out there. There is no out there. There are no physical places that exist independent from consciousness, and whether it's individual consciousness or collective consciousness, what we call the external world is actually the collective consciousness. And it's the collective consciousness, as we observe it, that gets filtered through each one of our individual consciousnesses. So it's kind of like a feedback loop. We observe the collective consciousness, which is what we call the external world. As we're observing it, it gets filtered through our individual consciousness, and it's like a feedback loop. The individual consciousness observes the collective consciousness, which further creates the collective consciousness. I know I said this in my other videos, but I really want to drive home the fact that, there's still chairs and things that we call things, but they don't exist in the way we've been conditioned to think they do. At the root of those tables and chairs are waves that have been collapsed into what we call particles through the act of observation, the act of consciousness, really. Really, I would argue that the word particle or matter is just a misleading label that humans have invented. Really, there are no particles. There's just consciousness. But you get my point. Eventually, probably a long time from now, what people call the external world will come to look like an apparent place that reflects the higher collective consciousness. But for now, the lower collective consciousness is dominant in this realm. But you can still see glimpses of the new earth now when you're in nature. And just look at the sky. I mean, just look how expanded and vivid it looks whenever you can slow down and pull your awareness away from the dominant lower collective consciousness. It's just, that amnesia, it just makes things hard. It's just the amnesia that makes this war so hard sometimes. But that won't last forever, guys. But anyways, on that note, I want to thank y'all for watching this video, and I hope you guys are having a good day. I'll talk to you guys later.